Pastor John, thanks so much.
You bet.
Great to be back. Great to be back with you all. It seems like it wasn't too long ago, right? I think it was late November. It's funny. Thank you. When Pastor John said, hey, you available on March 15th? I said, well, I just gave an update on November 30th, I think, at church. But then I said, you know what? In the Middle East, a lot happens in the span of 3 months, needless to say, in the Middle East and the world. And needless to say, it really has. And I dress casual tonight, which I prefer. Last time I wore a sports coat, I tried to look very official. Pastor John said, relax, you're at Calvary Chapel. And I saw Jesus Revolution last week. Incredible. You have to see it. I mean, incredible. But Pastor John, you're lucky I'm even wearing shoes after watching Jesus Revolution. What an amazing move, though, seriously. And Pastor John just kind of alluded to it. We'll talk about everything going on in Israel, wars and rumors of wars. But folks, revival is in the air right now. I think the film Jesus Revolution is part of that. We're in trouble as a country. We know that. We discussed it last time. Everyone here has discernment. You know, you have clarity. You know what's going on in the world. We're in big, big trouble. Jesus is the answer, and revival is the only answer, really, in this country. There's no political solution ultimately. It's a God solution. That's what we need. So if you leave here with anything tonight, I don't want you to leave downtrodden and discouraged and say, my gosh, the world is falling apart. Leave here knowing that God is moving. And will we see a sweeping revival in this nation? I don't know. I pray that we do. But there are certainly some stirrings right now. It's encouraging. We all need it too, right? My gosh, it's good to see that encouragement. Young people on college campuses. Again, I think the film is part of that. The timing was not a coincidence. So I'm praying for that overtime revival in this land. I know you all are too. So let's try and stay positive. Not try and stay positive. We got to be positive. We're not to have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. God is very clear. He's on the throne. He's in control. And now to the real March Madness. What's going on in the Middle East right now? You know it's bad. You know these are unprecedented times when for the first time since 1977, there's not one Philadelphia team in the NCAA tournament. As surprise, surprise, I'm a basketball player, basketball fan. No, Temple, Nova, St. Joe's, LaSalle, Penn, nobody. I'm depressed. It ruins my March Madness. But let's get into the real March Madness. It's not a monthly thing, a seasonal thing. It's been centuries of madness in the Middle East, and it affects us profoundly here no matter where we live. Okay, we want to get into a few things. Number one, have you heard about this Saudi-Iran deal? Now, folks, this is interesting because we've been hearing so much noise, not noise, but chatter in Israel in particular. I interviewed the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, in December, and one of the first things he said to me was, hey, I think we have a real chance to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords, an historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. He's been saying that very excitedly. I was in Israel about 3 weeks ago. He gave a talk, kind of an intimate, about 50 of us. He gave a talk, and he was gushing. We're, basically saying, we're going to do this. Peace is at the door with Saudi Arabia. I think it's doable. To the point where I said to some friends there, man, he's almost telegraphing it too much, I felt like. When you think about the original Abraham Accords back in August 2020, the UAE and Bahrain, that kind of came out of left field, right? Wow, Israel's making peace with the UAE and Bahrain. This is a big deal. A month later, I was at the White House on the lawn for the ceremony. It all kind of came together very quickly. But they didn't talk about it. There was rumblings about the UAE and everything, but he's really been talking about it, which makes me think, wow, either he's overconfident or he knows something we don't. He's got back channel talks going on with the Saudis right now. In 2019, I believe, he did visit Saudi Arabia, a one-day trip. Bibi went to Saudi, and he met with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So a lot going on there, especially behind the scenes. Israeli planes, including possibly fighter jets on their way to Iran in the not-so-distant future, can now use Saudi airspace. I flew to the UAE a few months ago, and we flew over Saudi Arabia, a day I thought I would never see. I flew out of Tel Aviv, and we crossed from Israel over Saudi Arabia. Bible times, historic things happening, chess pieces moving on the board. So I say all that to say it looked like a real likelihood. Saudi Arabia and Israel could have peace. Folks, think about that. Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam. A lot of great symbolism for Muslims around the world, of course. Mecca and Medina, the two holy sites of Islam, are there. It's the place. They see themselves as the guardians of the Islamic religion, the Saudi royal family does, and it's the center in many ways. So for them to possibly make peace with the Zionist entity, Israel, talk about history changing and a total game changer. Netanyahu told me it would be a quantum leap, his words. He said, hey, it's one thing, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, that's great, treaties with them, but Saudi Arabia, that changes the entire global landscape of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So all of this positive momentum is building. And then last week, a bomb drops, not literal, a figurative bomb. We'll talk about the literal bombs tonight too. A bomb drops. Saudi Arabia and Iran have come to an agreement. They've made a deal to restore relations. What? And not only that, the deal was brokered by China in Beijing. So it gets worse. So I'm thinking, what's happening here? And the day before this deal was announced, I believe it was announced on Friday, just 5 days ago, it was announced. An earth-shaking announcement to me on a few levels. We'll discuss in a second the significance of it. But just the day before, there were reports that Saudi Arabia had been talking to the Biden administration and saying, look, we will consider peace with Israel, formal diplomatic relations with the Jewish state. If you help us with a few things, one thing we want help with is our civilian nuclear program and a few other things. And I suppose the Biden administration wasn't too warm to that. And the next day, we had this announcement, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Just to give you some background, folks, Iran and Saudi Arabia have been at complete loggerheads for years. They have had no relations for the past 7 years. It's unraveled. And on one side, I call them the sheep and goat nations. On one side, you have Israel and the Sunni Arab nations, Egypt and Jordan, obviously long-standing peace treaties there. The Abraham Accords nations, UAE, Bahrain, and the Saudis were in that mix, not officially, but certainly with warming relations with Israel. On the other side, you have the Iran axis, the Iranian regime. The Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, all the nice guys. The Houthis in Yemen. Very clear divide there in the region. And now Saudi Arabia has crossed that divide, reached a hand across. And it's troubling for a few reasons. Number one, it was a complete curveball. As I said, all the momentum was building in the other direction. And the Iranians, look, to give you some more backdrop on how tense that relationship was with Saudi Arabia, number one, the Iranians covet Mecca and Medina. They see themselves, the Iranian leadership, as the guardians of Islam. They're the true standard bearers for the Islamic faith. The Saudi royal family sees itself as the guardians. Hey, we're home to the birthplace of Muhammad. Mecca and Medina are here in our backyard. We are the leaders of the Islamic world. So there's that rivalry there. And to the point, in 2019, Iran actually carried out a major attack using ballistic missiles and drones packed with explosives. They attacked the Saudi Aramco oil facility. Not to get too in the weeds with it, I think everyone in here has a pretty good indication that a lot of oil comes out of the Middle East, in particular Saudi Arabia. So if you hit Saudi Arabia's oil supply, that's big trouble for their economy, and it's big trouble really for all of us. Globally, there are repercussions. For a time, Iran carries out this attack, missiles and drones, kind of a hybrid deal. They attack this oil facility, and for a time, some 5% of the world's oil supply was cut off. You might say 5%, big deal. It has repercussions. You're seeing right now what's going on with the economy and banks collapsing. So it has an effect. And it was almost a warning shot to Iran. And folks, a key point here, there was no response. There was no response. Saudi Arabia took it on the chin. It was an attack on their sovereign territory from Iran. U.S. intelligence, Israeli intelligence, they all believe The attack didn't come from Yemen or like a proxy of Iran. It came from Iran proper, from the Iranian mainland. Missiles, drones were launched across the Gulf at Saudi Arabia, and there was no response. The Saudis didn't respond. The U.S. backing the Saudis, no response. Folks, listen. Iran is taking notes. This is what bullies do. If you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. They're going to continue to push. They didn't see a response. Meanwhile, at Saudi Arabia's southern doorstep in Yemen, we can actually pull the Middle East map up, guys. If you have it, the broader map. I'm just looking for an excuse to use the pointer, actually. But let's see. Okay. The most peaceful region in the world. I'm sorry, there it is. Okay. Saudi Arabia, Yemen to the south, and here is tiny Israel. Folks, really, wrap your head around that, take a step back, and just kind of gather yourself. This is Israel. You can barely, it's covered by the little dot. And look at all the nations around it that hate it and most want to wipe it off the map. And it's in the center of the world, literally. I mean, it's the center of God's economy, God's prophetic plan, but it's literally the geographic center of the world. And Jerusalem is the center of that center. I'm sure it's all coincidence when God made this world. We'll talk about Jerusalem in a second. I just want to real quick touch on this Iran-Saudi thing a little bit more. It's important, I think. So here's Yemen. You have Iranian proxies, the Houthis. Funny name, I know, but dangerous characters. They're launching attacks against Saudi Arabia. Boom, rockets, missiles from here. All equipped by Iran. They send the weapons. They ship them by sea usually, and boom. So they've really put the squeeze on Saudi Arabia. And now Saudi Arabia is saying, okay, this regime, Iran, which are genocidal madmen with an apocalyptic worldview, not the Iranian people, key distinction there, the Iranian people who are the main victims of this regime, who are still many out in the streets right now protesting against the regime. They're being jailed, tortured, killed, executed. But that's what the people in Iran are doing right now. Many of them, not all, many reject this regime. And to encourage you, I said you'll leave here tonight with encouragement. The fastest growing church in the world right now is in Iran. Would you believe it? The underground church in Iran is exploding. It's amazing to see the stories, the testimonies. Against all odds, against tremendous persecution, the church continues to expand. It's the same in China, by the way. But it almost reminds me of the days when Pharaoh was trying to kill every Israeli child, every firstborn, and he couldn't. More kept coming, and the Israelites kept multiplying in Egypt. You can't stop the gospel at the end of the day. You can try, you can't stop the gospel. So be encouraged about that. To see that in Iran, of all places, one of the great untold stories today, certainly in the Middle East, this underground church there. It's all underground against, look, tremendous threats and persecution, but it's growing and expanding. In Iran, the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism. Only God. Only God. So be encouraged about that. Yes, on one track, there's nasty things happening. On the other track, God is moving. And that's not only his land, Israel, his region. The entire region. These are Bible lands. Folks, Iran is a Bible land. We just passed the Jewish holiday of Purim, the story of Esther, Mordecai, Haman. That happened in modern-day Iran. Ancient Persia is modern-day Iran. Darius, Cyrus. Think of these figures from your Bible. God called Cyrus, my servant Cyrus. He didn't know the Lord, but God used him. All of this happened in Iran. It's a Bible land. So I don't think God is done with that nation. I really don't. I love the Iranian people. I've met so many Iranians through the years in my work and in my travels. Once they come to the Lord and they accept Jesus and they walk with the Lord, they're incredible. And if there's a sweeping revival in that nation, look out, and that regime better look out. Is it going to happen? I don't know. This regime has shown itself during these protests to have, and this is the understatement of the year, a very heavy hand in cracking down, and they always have. There's a reason the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, his nickname is the Butcher of Tehran. He didn't get that by sending people flowers and postcards, I'm sure, that nickname. So this is what you're dealing with right now. But all of this is the backdrop. the attacks against Saudi Arabia feels squeezed. They don't have nuclear weapons. Iran is on the verge. Iran, folks, right across the Gulf. I mean, here's Iran and here's Saudi Arabia. A few hundred miles. They're separated by the Persian Gulf. That's it. That's it. And you know Iran has plenty of ballistic missiles all along that coastline pointed at Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are nervous. The UN, not exactly a hawkish institution, recently released a report saying that, not to get in the weeds here, but you'll get this. I get confused with it, to be honest with you. I was not good at math. I was an English major. Surprise, surprise. 84% uranium. Iran is now enriching uranium at an 84% clip. Long story short, you need to enrich uranium at a 90% clip to develop nuclear weapons. They're at 84. They're 6% off. The Saudis are seeing all of this, and they're saying, man, and, which we'll talk about in a second, they're seeing Iran and Russia come closer together. And the Saudis are saying, uh-oh. They're looking at the United States, and they're saying, they don't want any parts of this. This current leadership wants to appease the Iranians and strike a new deal with them. So we can't count on them. They look at Israel, and they say, man, I don't know, Israel right now seems like it's a mess internally. Squabbling, bickering, protest in the street. So the Saudis, I think, are saying, if you can't beat them, join them. Now, I'm not saying join them in terms of Saudi Arabia is going to line up next to Iran and be on their side. No, no, no. What Saudi is thinking of, the Saudi leadership, is a kind of non-aggression pact. Hey, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, and just let us do our thing and live in peace in the region. And don't support the Houthis in Yemen against us, and we won't support anyone against you. Maybe we won't sign a peace treaty with Israel. And they're basically saying, just please don't attack us. I mean, let's cut to the chase, folks. The problem with that is Iran's not known to keep their end of the bargain. So you're kind of staving off your eventual demise if you're Saudi Arabia in doing this. All that said, it shows you a few things. Number one, look, the weakness in Washington right now, we can talk about it all night long. This is how our allies are regarding us. We can't trust them. They don't have our back. We're against the wall here. What do? We're desperate. It also shows you China's ascension, another obviously prophetic chess piece, the rise of China. And now, hey, they're a big global broker. They're in Beijing. They're bringing nations together and holding up peace treaties. That's a coup for China. They're a big winner in this. But and Israel, I hate to say a loser, but look, it was a total curveball. One day we're talking about a peace treaty with Saudi Arabia. The next day they're running into the arms of our greatest enemy, Iran. So Israel's rocked by it a little bit. Israel has released no statements about this, nothing out of Jerusalem yet. Bear in mind one thing, which may be encouraging. I interviewed Amir Sarfati on Monday. Anyone know Amir? Behold Israel. Great channel, great guy, good friend. He made some good points. He's got great intel. He's on the ground in Israel. He made some good points. He said, look, this deal between Saudi and Iran is not formalized yet. There's still 2 months. There's a 2-month window where the Saudis can pull out of this thing. He said, what I think is that Saudi Arabia, I don't want to say it's a cry for help or a wake-up call to the U.S., but the Saudis are saying, America, look what you made us do. You left us with no choice. Are you going to step up and get in the game and get serious about confronting Iran's nuclear program, or what? You put us in a no-win situation, and now look. And they're saying to Israel, hey, we know you're a strong horse. We know that you're serious when you say you're going to strike Iran's nuclear facilities if you need to, and they're going to need to. But you guys are a mess right now. You've had 5 elections in 4 years. You have thousands of people in the streets at each other's throats. Can we rely on you right now? You're so internally divided. So I think there's a chance, and Amir shared this analysis, and he's very sharp, perhaps the Saudis are just, it's almost a cry for help, sending a message, a wake-up call. Hey, help us out, or look what we got to do here. So maybe they won't go all in and formalize this thing. We'll see. I pray they don't. But there's not going to be a chance that Saudi comes alongside Iran and says, no, they're not going to take that tack and align themselves with the Iran axis. They're not going to go there. Again, think non-aggression. And prophetically, remember this, folks. In the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, it talks about Sheba and Dedan. Funny names, I know. The modern day names would likely be Saudi Arabia, that Arabian Peninsula area right here. And it says when that coalition comes down from the north on the mountains of Israel, led by, I believe, Mother Russia, and joined by Iran, Persia, Ezekiel calls it, Turkey, Gomer, Beth Togarmah, all these funny biblical names that have relevance today. When they come down and they attempt an invasion of Israel and they don't get very far, it says the merchants of Sheba and Dedan protest. They say, why are you doing this? And the young lions of Tarshish, another funny name, but very relevant. Many think that could be the UK, could even be the US, European nations. They all protest, the UAE, Saudi. They all protest, but they don't do anything. They don't militarily intervene. Israel's on its own. They do have a slightly powerful ally by the name of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who intervenes. So they're good. But needless to say, these nations, the Bible says, they protest. Why are you doing this? They can't believe this is happening. Why would you do this? But they don't intervene militarily. Considering that, I believe that Saudi Arabia will not go all in some kind of, real meaningful alliance with Iran where they're exchanging military technology, nothing like that. I think the Saudis, if this non-aggression pact, I would call it, holds, you'll still see them unhappy about this invasion of Israel, and because they'll feel threatened. So bear that in mind. But just a little bit of backdrop on that, because it's a fresh, breaking kind of news story, and you might have been seeing that and saying, hey, wait a minute, what? Saudi Arabia and Iran? I thought they were saying Saudi Arabia and Israel were about to get together. What happened? A little bit of backdrop for you, if that makes sense. I want to talk about Jerusalem. Also want to talk about, real quick, this whole dynamic with Russia, Ukraine, and Iran and Israel. Real quick, interesting how this is shaping up. Israel, for the past 13 months since that war broke out in Ukraine, has been walking a fine line, and it's been a very delicate dance, I would say. On one hand, they want to provide Ukraine with moral support. On the other hand, that's where they draw the line. They're not going to give Ukraine military assistance. Why aren't they going to do that? Because they have the Russian bear at their doorstep in Syria. Russia is at Israel's doorstep, right here. Israel, here's tiny Israel, the size of the state of New Jersey. Really, it really is the size, and you'll be there, a few people, next month. It's going to be amazing, your trip, but you will see. You will be able to travel the entire country in 6-7 hours from north to south. Syria's here. So thousands of Russian troops on Israel's doorstep. Israel needs freedom of movement there in Syria. Why? Because Iran and Hezbollah have set up shop there. And they're trying to build a launching pad from which they can attack Israel. The Middle East, always such a stable place. March madness, April madness, February madness. But Israel needs to move. There you go. Even better, Matt. Excellent. Israel needs to, hey, Iran and Hezbollah, you're trying to set up shop here with missiles and rockets and all sorts of stuff, and you're going to launch them right on the Galilee. We can't have it. So Israel has conducted hundreds of airstrikes over the past several years against Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. It's absolutely crucial for Israel, for their defense strategy. They must have freedom of movement in Syria. If they don't, it's big trouble. Because Iran, number one, not only trying to build up that launching pad, that beachhead to launch attacks and line missiles and rockets up at Israel's doorstep, but also they're using Syria as a transit point to transit precision-guided missiles, PGM for short. Send them through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah in Lebanon. These PGMs do exactly what their name says. They're designed to strike a target with greater accuracy and greater precision. For Israel, They're a game changer. As a matter of fact, folks, 1A in threats against Israel is, of course, Iran's nuclear program. Israeli defense officials consider these PGMs 1B. It's that serious of a threat. Once you have precision-guided missiles, they're going to hit the target that you program into them, including, say, Israel, God forbid, their nuclear reactor in Dimona. This is the kind of threat Israel has to be concerned about with these precision-guided missiles. So they need to be able to take these out in Syria. But what if Russia says no more? What if Russia says, Israel, Syria is now officially a no-fly zone. We control the airspace here, and we have decided that you no longer can use it. Iran is our friend. Iran and Russia have a great military alliance right now, growing by leaps and bounds every day. And Russia might say, Iran is our friend. And you have to believe that Iran is nudging Russia. Hey, I thought we were allies. Why are you letting Israel bomb us right under your noses in Syria? Especially when Iran is now supplying Russia with thousands of drones that it's using in Ukraine. And not on the battlefield. They're using them in terror attacks in Kyiv and other places, flying them into buildings, civilian targets. To the point where Iran is about to build a drone factory in Russia, near Moscow. This is how deep the relationship is getting, folks. It's a formalized military alliance now between Russia and Iran. It's a very big deal. Russia this month is set to deliver Iran fighter jets, Russian fighter jets. Look, the Iranian Air Force is from like the 1960s and 1970s. So they need an update. And Russia is stepping into the void and providing that update. It's a quid pro quo type relationship. The Iranian regime isn't supplying Russia with drones out of the goodness of its heart. They're saying, what do we get in return? Will you help us with our nuclear program? Will you shut the skies over Syria and shut off Israel's access to Syria? Folks, you know those conversations have taken place. What Israel and Russia have had in Syria, Israel calls the deconfliction mechanism. Big term for basically saying that every time Israel, or most of the time that Israel is going to carry out a strike in Syria, they give Russia a heads up. They say, hey, we're coming in. We don't want any inadvertent strikes, accidentally hitting any Russian planes, tanks, soldiers. We're coming in, just a heads up. And Russia, shockingly, I have to say, it's been over 7 years now, in my view, shockingly, has stood aside. And they've allowed Israel to operate freely in Syria. Folks, I believe a day is coming where that's going to change. It's been 7.5 years now since Russia entered Syria. And they're there to stay. They're not going anywhere. They're perfectly poised for that Ezekiel invasion. They're already on the mountains of Israel practically. They're right across the border in Syria. For 7.5 years, Russia has restrained itself. There are signs that is going to change. As Russia and Iran come closer and closer together, it's going to get to the point where they're allies. It's an alliance. And Russia is increasingly reliant on Iran. Now, if you would have told me this 14 months ago, right before Russia invaded Ukraine, I would have said, certainly Iran needs Russia more than Russia needs Iran. Folks, today the tide has turned a bit. Russia has had a shortage of munitions, rockets, missiles. They need the drones. They've gone to North Korea. They've gone to China. They've gone to Iran to replenish their stockpiles to use in Ukraine. There's a need there. Russia's been isolated on the world stage. So has Iran. And they're increasingly coming closer and closer together. Israel is the odd man out there. Hey, you can tell a lot about a man or a nation by the company they keep. The company Vladimir Putin keeps is Iran, North Korea, China, the Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah, and Hamas. Yes, a Hamas delegation visited Moscow a few months ago. You can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And by the way, I've heard this narrative that Vladimir Putin is a defender of Christianity and a defender of Western civilization. Some have said that. Some have commented on my YouTube channel. If that's the case, why is he aligned with the world's greatest persecutors of Christianity? China, North Korea, and Iran. They are arguably the three biggest persecutors of followers of Jesus in the world. And Vladimir Putin has given them a warm embrace. I call those four nations the Gathering Storm Coalition. It's a gathering storm, and they're in the center of it. These are the three worst persecutors of Christianity in the world. If you're a defender of the faith, so to speak, these are not the kind of people you're rubbing shoulders with. But Israel's standing back and they're watching this develop with Russia and Iran, and they are alarmed. And now you have Israel suddenly talking about possibly giving more aid to Ukraine, perhaps even military aid. Now, Israel has given over $20 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine over the past year, a lot of that, and has condemned the Russian invasion. But Israel said, hey, we're drawing the line at giving you any kind of military assistance. We're not giving you Iron Dome. Certainly not giving you our missile defense system, only to have it captured on the battlefield, and then Russia and Iran have our technology, the Iron Dome technology. No thanks. Israel wisely, I think, has restrained from that and said, you know what, we'll give you moral support, but we have our own interests. And Israel is a sovereign nation. And I feel the same way about the United States. We need to put our interest first. It's not being selfish. That's not being careless about other nations. As a sovereign nation, we need to think of our own nation, our own people, our own citizens, our own defense first. And I think Israel is wisely doing that. They're saying, look, hey, we hope you prevail over Russia, but we need to be able to operate in Syria. It's an existential threat for us. If we can't operate in Syria, that endangers our citizens. And we need to put our citizens first. And if we give you all sorts of weaponry, then we're going to be at loggerheads with Russia. It's not going to be pretty. And there may be a no-fly zone over Syria. So that's Israel's thinking here. But is that thinking, I don't want to say starting to change, but I think Israel is sending a message here. In getting closer to Ukraine in recent weeks, the foreign minister of Israel, Eli Cohen, I just interviewed him at the Knesset a few weeks ago. He had just gotten off the plane from Ukraine. I was heading to the airport to fly home. He had just gotten off the plane. I was able to grab him, thank God. He's Israel's top diplomat. He was returning from Ukraine. He met with Zelensky, met with the Ukrainian leadership, and he said, look, we are joining forces with Ukraine against Iran. He didn't say anything about Russia, but he said, look, we have a common enemy in Iran, because Ukraine has said Iran is our enemy. They're killing us. They're sending weapons to kill us that Russia's using. And I think what's going on here, and Netanyahu apparently has been talking to his defense officials about possibly giving more aid to Ukraine. And folks, I think that what's going on here is pretty simply geopolitics and the whole chessboard moving. Boil it down for you in a real simple way, because you might hear more chatter about this in the days to come. Israel is saying to Russia, I thought we had a good relationship. Not an alliance, but fair and maybe not warm relations, but good relations. Over 1 million Russians live in Israel. A lot of Russian speakers here. We've had a good, since the end of the Cold War, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've had a pretty good relationship. Benjamin Netanyahu has visited Moscow several times, has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. And Israel's saying all that, and now you're basically stabbing us in the back, and you're getting in bed with our greatest enemy, a nation that wants to wipe us off the map. You're in league with them. Israel's saying, okay, two can play that game. You want to align yourself with our greatest enemy, a nation devoted to our destruction? Well, maybe we'll get a little closer to Ukraine, your greatest enemy. I think that's some of the thinking here. It's the geopolitical game, folks. Statecraft, they might call it, on the global stage. I think Israel's sending a message to Russia and saying, hey, two can play that game. Okay. You want to align yourselves with Iran and Hezbollah, the entities that want to destroy us? Maybe we'll get a little closer to Ukraine. That's how it works. And that's how the game's being played right now on the global stage. Just to give you a little backdrop on that, because I believe that tensions will escalate in the days to come Russia is not going to be happy. Any sign of Israel giving more to Ukraine, more aid to Ukraine of any kind, Russia is not going to be happy. And the tensions between Israel and Russia are going to increase. And I believe where it's heading is the war of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but Ezekiel 38 and 39, I know Pastor John has taught on it. We've talked about it here many times before. So I believe that's ultimately where it's leading, not overnight, but what you're seeing right now is a pretty steady unraveling of relations between Israel and Russia. And it's going to continue because that Russia-Iran relationship is going to become closer. And if and when Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, and I think it's going to happen, and this is where it gets really interesting. We're going to start talking about prophetic implications, Jerusalem, Netanyahu. This Netanyahu government, and I think it will survive the current madness going on right now. It just felt, for him to come back into office, to me, felt prophetic. And this governing coalition is filled with individuals who want to see prayer on the Temple Mount, and they want to see the third temple built. And in interviewing Benjamin Netanyahu 2 months ago, I asked him point blank, I didn't say this, but I was thinking, you're 73 years old. I didn't say you're 73 years old. He looks great, by the way. He's sharp. He's very sharp mentally. Come on, he's a Philly boy. He went to Cheltenham High School. You know that, right? We're claiming him. He's one of ours. 3 years at Cheltenham High School. True story. He and his brother Yoni and Reggie Jackson all went to Cheltenham High School. True story. And it was funny, in the beginning of the interview, I've met him before, but I never interviewed him. It was the first time I interviewed him. And I want to thank this congregation because when I was here in late November, I said, hey, pray for me. I'm trying to get an interview with Netanyahu. And a few days later, it came through. That was Calvary Chapel. I'm saying it. Prayer works. But I kind of broke the ice with him and said, hey, yeah, I grew up not far from Cheltenham High School. Well, I didn't know how he would respond. He loved it. We talked for about 5 minutes all about it. I loved Cheltenham High School. I had a great experience living there and going to school there, so that was pretty cool. So we broke the ice, and we were like old friends by the time we started. He was supposed to give us 25 minutes. I interviewed him for 35 minutes. So it was a wide-ranging interview, got into his inspiration, his personal life, his story. He's a fascinating guy. As you know, he's brilliant. He's an historic figure. But I said, look, you're 73 years old. You're Israel's longest-serving prime minister. 15 years at the helm. You've been through hell. They've come after your family. The media has come after your family. You've had to deal with the Obama administration, which was very hostile towards you. Why come back? You've accomplished, it seems, everything there is to accomplish. Sit on the beach in Caesarea with your grandkids and enjoy the rest of your days. Write your memoirs. No. Why did you come back? He said 3 reasons: Iran, Iran, and Iran. Folks, I'm telling you right now, he sees himself, it's not my opinion, he's verbalized this. He sees himself as a Churchillian figure. Winston Churchill. Bibi's a huge admirer. One of my heroes, Winston Churchill. Bibi's a huge admirer of him. Churchill, we talk about the gathering storm. He coined the phrase. He also coined the phrase the Iron Curtain. In both instances, Winston Churchill saw what was coming. In the late 1930s, early 1940s, he saw the gathering storm of Nazi Germany. No one wanted to face up to it. His own parliament called him an alarmist, a warmonger, sensationalistic. He was ridiculed. The world certainly felt that way. Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler and had peace in our time. Netanyahu sees himself in the same vein. For 20 years, he's been more really than 20 years. He's been warning about the Iran nuclear threat. We have to deal with this, folks. We have to do something about it. The world hasn't wanted to hear it. We want to negotiate diplomacy, Iran nuclear deal in 2015, attempts to revive the Iran nuclear deal in 2021, 2022, like a vampire from the grave. Thankfully, it didn't happen, but never say never, sadly. But Netanyahu ridiculed, warmonger, you're exaggerating the threat. There's a new book out now written by an American author saying the whole Iran nuclear threat has been overblown by Israel. It's an exaggeration. It's not a threat. So this is what he's dealing with. The media attacks him and his family at every turn. He could have, man, it must have been so tempting to ride off into the sunset and say, I'm done with this. But he came back into the buzzsaw. He knew he'd be dealing with a not-so-friendly administration in Washington. Many in the Biden administration are holdovers from the Obama administration. He knew all of this, but I think the words of Churchill were echoing in his ears. He believes, Benjamin Netanyahu, and I tried to gently not poke him, but nudge him on his faith a little bit. Do you see yourself as a figure of destiny? I should have brought a clip, honestly, and played it. Do you see yourself as a figure of destiny? I said, I know you're familiar with the story of Esther. Are you someone who's in this position for such a time as this? And he kind of said, well, I'm not sure. Could providence be involved? He called it providence, God's hand. Could it be involved? Perhaps. He said, I don't believe any of this is a coincidence. I believe the events in my life have led me up to this moment. I agree with him. And I think the moment of reckoning is coming, perhaps sooner than later. Folks, it's no coincidence that U.S. defense officials, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, yes, I say that with scorn, were in Israel last week, meeting with Israeli defense officials. They're nervous in D.C. They're nervous because they're saying, man, is Israel going to strike? Are they going to tell us? Are they going to give us a heads up beforehand? If they strike Iran, will they at least give us a heads up? They're going to set the whole world on fire if they do it. What are we going to do? What are they thinking? So expect more of these meetings between U.S. officials and Israeli officials in the days to come. They're nervous. They know that Israel's losing patience. They don't like Netanyahu, and they don't trust Netanyahu, and they don't know what he's going to do. And he's talking about it constantly. We're going to do what we need to do. We're not bluffing. We're going to do it. So we are at a very delicate moment, is the most polite way I can say. And if you turned on your TV tomorrow and Israel was conducting airstrikes in Iran, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's 2 years from now. Key point to remember with the U.S.-Israel relationship, right now in Nevada, Nellis Air Force Base, it's just north of Las Vegas, there's a joint Air Force drill going on right now between the U.S. Air Force and the Israeli Air Force. And one of the things they're practicing is mid-air refueling. Look, Iran, again, no coincidences here. Iran lies 1,200 miles from Israel. That's a longer distance than Israeli fighter jets usually fly. Look, bombing in Syria, of course. They've carried out some strikes along the Syria-Iraq border. But Iran, that's 1,200 miles, a far distance. So either on the way there or the way back, I'm not a pilot, I don't know. But I do know they're going to have to refuel eventually. And you need these refueling planes where in midair you can refuel. Now, Israel has ordered 4 of them from the United States. They've tried to get the Biden administration to expedite the delivery. The administration's been dragging its feet. Surprise, surprise. They're set to be delivered in 2025. We just flipped the calendar to 2023. I don't think Israel has that long to wait. I don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. Maybe it will be 2026, but I don't know that Israel feels they have that long. If Iran's at 84%, they need 90. All the signs are there. They can break out, and if they so choose, they prefer right now to keep the world on a string and keep the world on eggshells. But if they so choose and they break out, they could be a nuclear power. It's not going to happen. There's no way it's happening on Netanyahu's watch. No way it's happening. And Israel has excellent human intelligence on the ground in Iran right now. Assets on the ground who've carried out sabotage, all manner of attacks, smaller scale attacks against those nuclear facilities. Now, bear in mind, you need the refueling planes. It would seem, I'm not a military strategist. The Israeli military is brilliant. They've carried out some of the most daring raids and operations in modern history. Entebbe, for one. Enough said. So we'll see what they have up their sleeves. They might have something, we might all be looking right, and they go left. And Iran might be expecting one thing, Israel does another thing. Remember, too, those Iranian nuclear facilities are spread out throughout the country. Iran's a big country, and those facilities are spread out. Do we have the Middle East map, guys? We do. Okay, Persia, Iran, there you go. It's a big country. I mean, that's a lot of territory, right? And look, those facilities are not only scattered throughout the country, but many of them are deep underground in fortified bunkers, literally. I mean, so Israel's going to need the right kind of bombs. Again, I'm not a military strategist. I talked to Israel Defense Forces officials, and they keep it pretty close to the vest. Surprise, surprise. But it's a monumental task. It's not an easy task. It's not like Top Gun, where they hit the one site, Top Gun Maverick, if you saw that in the summertime. They hit the one site, which had to be based on Iran, by the way, if you saw the movie. It's a good flick if you haven't seen it. It's actually patriotic and not woke. It was very refreshing. Very refreshing. A pro-American film. Wow, I didn't know they made them anymore. But in that film, there was an unnamed enemy. They strike the nuclear facility of an unnamed enemy. It had to be based on Iran at least, but it was one nuclear site. Iran has several nuclear sites scattered throughout the country. Again, they're deep underground. Two things to remember. Number one, look, Israel carried out strikes in 1981 against Saddam's nuclear reactor in Iraq, in 2007 against Assad's nuclear reactor in Syria. So number one, there's a precedent here. Hello. Whenever a nuclear threat gathers in Israel's neighborhood from a hostile nation, they're going to act, and they're going to act preemptively, and they're going to eliminate that threat, or at least push it back 10 years. They might not completely destroy Iran's nuclear program. They might just hit a few sites. Even if Israel buys 5 years, they'll say it's worth it. So there's a precedent with Iraq and Syria, but those were single sites. It was easier. I'm going to say nothing's easy. It's never easy. But compared to Iran, it's a bigger task, but you got to believe that the God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. And that he's watching over his land and his people, and he's going to make a way. I'm not naive about it. I see things I'm a harsh realist, but Israel's different. And God is in control. And who would have ever thought Entebbe would happen? Who would have ever thought that Iron Dome would exist, which eliminates 90% of these incoming rockets? Who would have ever thought the Six-Day War would happen in Israel with a resounding victory? The Egyptian Air Force destroyed on the ground while they're drinking coffee in the morning. The war was over before it started. Only God. Who would have ever thought, to really simplify it, and really I don't need this, I can drop the mic after this. Who would have ever thought that the Jewish people would return to their ancient and ancestral homeland after 2,000 years and revive the Hebrew language after 2,500 years? That's proof of God. Once Israel was reestablished miraculously in 1948, against all odds, folks, out of the ashes of the Holocaust. I mean, the Holocaust just ended in 45. And in 48, Israel, the Jewish people, are reestablishing their ancient homeland after 2,000 years at their lowest point. They're reestablishing it's, as they said in The Princess Bride, it's inconceivable. Another good movie. Inconceivable that this would happen. But it happened. Because God exists and he's on the throne. It's his land. He's got the title deed to the land. When it comes to Israel, when it comes to God in general, the Word of God in general, he's not gray. God's very black and white, which I appreciate. You know exactly where he stands. That's wrong. That's good. That pleases me. That's evil. He's very black and white. I appreciate a God we serve who's like that. The God we serve, I should say. No gray areas with God. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, folks, these are evil. Evil individuals, evil entities. In these morally relative times we live in, I know it's not popular to say that. Well, look, we all have different opinions, and that's their truth. Speak your truth. There's only one truth. We're going to call it like we see it. We have to, right? We have to be salt and light as believers. Wrapping up here, Jerusalem. And hopefully this gives you, not to get too in the weeds with this stuff, I know it can make your head spin. My wife was like, wait, who, what? Wait, Shia, Sunni, who? She gets it, but I have to say, yeah, I got to always, and doing TV, you got to simplify, because some people are saying, what are you talking about? I never heard of that. I interview some of my favorite writers and favorite thinkers. They're brilliant writers. You get them on camera, it's like they're speaking Greek. They're great people, brilliant minds. It's almost like their heads are too small to contain all those ideas. And you get them on camera, and they just can't speak to the average American who really needs to be informed. Sometimes that can be frustrating. So thank God for editing sometimes. But important stuff. And this is the most informed audience I talk to, bar none. I discussed that with Pastor John. So I love speaking at Calvary Chapel. I love speaking at your church because, man, they get it. That's all I say. They get it there, man. But Jerusalem, I know you're eager to hear about that. We'll have some people in Jerusalem soon. Anyone here, is it going to be your first time in Israel? Oh, wow, I'm so excited for you. Man, it changed my life. It put me on the trajectory. This little teaser for the men's event on May 6th. I went to Israel at a time of great, I am going to talk about Jerusalem. I know we only have a minute left. I promise. I do want to share this real quick. God took me to, it's your first time in Jerusalem. I went to Jerusalem for the first time at a time of great, I wouldn't say calamity. Yeah, maybe you could say calamity in my life. Very, very tough time. It was the fall of 2008. And I was in D.C., living in D.C., working for CBN News. I did not know the Lord yet. You're saying, wait, you were working for the Christian Broadcasting Network. By the grace of God, they hired me. I didn't know the Lord yet, folks. I was not born again. I believed in God. I believed Jesus was the Savior of the world intellectually. He hadn't come into my heart and resided here yet because I hadn't let him in. But he kept knocking. He was very persistent. But I didn't know him personally. And tumultuous time. It's fall 2008. My wife, her parents passed away back to back, only 1 month apart. 1 month apart. Both were shocking. Both 57 years old. 1 month apart. It was earth-shaking for us. We were in the D.C. area. They were still in Philly. We're coming up on weekends to visit them. It was so stressful. You can only imagine. And we had a 1-year-old. And I had a pretty busy job in D.C. and covering all this stuff. I was spent, and my wife said, you know what? I think we need to move back home and get back around everybody and have help with our baby. And I said, I agree, I eventually did come back, but it wasn't time yet, God's timing. But I'm thinking of leaving CBN News and leaving it all behind, leaving Washington, D.C., and leaving this whole field, this whole career behind. In my rear view, I'm done. I'll go back to Philly. I'll get a job covering the Sixers or something like that. I was done. And it was, Lori, my wife, was down. Her parents just died 1 month apart. It was horrible and unexpected. We had a 1-year-old. Stress. I was concerned for my wife. I just wanted her to be okay and get back. I was on an early shift at work, the morning reporter. I won't recommend it. Those guys on Fox and Friends, I have a lot of respect for them. A lot of fluff on that show, but man, I was getting up 3 in the morning. You got to be on camera at 5:30. Hello. Thank God for makeup. I usually don't say that among men, but in that case, I'll take it. Put it on me. I'll take it. It's 5:30 in the morning. I was miserable, folks. I was miserable. I was conflicted. I would get off the metro in D.C. to walk to the office. I'd say, God, why are you doing this to me? Right? Not in a screaming at it, but like, God, more, why are you doing this to me? More pleading. I was always God-fearing. I was raised Catholic. I'd fear. So, trying to figure it out, and I'm sitting in the office, and long story short, an email drops out of the sky from an organization, pro-Israel organization, saying, hey, we love your work and we want to take you to Israel on an all-expenses-paid trip. My lifelong dream to go to Israel. Since I was a kid, my dad, that's a whole testimony I'll share. But to boil this little part of it down, I get this all expenses paid trip to Israel. And I remember meeting with my traveling companions, these other reporters and everything beforehand, saying, yeah, this is my last hurrah. I'm leaving the field. I'm not going to cover Israel, the Middle East anymore. I'm out of there. I'm going to move home, get a nice quiet job and settle down. And yeah, this is my last hurrah, though. At least I'm getting a chance to see Israel. Folks, let me tell you, by the time I was there for a week, by the time I boarded the flight home, my life was changed. Everything. Let me tell you, I don't know where you are in your life right now. Every time I'm at a tumultuous time in my life, it just seems, I have an Israel trip in a week. And I'm almost like, oh gosh, now I have to pack up and go to another country for a week. Oh gosh, in the middle of all this craziness, God takes me there and gives me complete peace and clarity. And by the time I'm on the flight home, I'm saying, whew, I'm so glad I came. Thank you, God. Thank you, thank you. You made it all clear to me in your land and in your city, Jerusalem. Just nothing like it for your first time. So to finish the story, I had the greatest week of my life up until that point. And a lot of love on the street by Israelis. I see you on TV. I like your work. That didn't sound Israeli. That sounded almost Scottish. But St. Paddy's Day is around the corner. I'm half Irish too. But I had an incredible week. And I land. This is during the recession, right? The Great Recession. This is a week after everything collapses. And I check my email when I land, and it's an email from my boss titled Increase. Folks, out of nowhere, at the height of the recession, I get a raise that I really didn't deserve because, I'll be honest with you, my attitude was sour. I'm waking up at 3 in the morning and schlepping in there. I was miserable. And I literally looked up and said, okay, God, I got it. I'm staying. He took me to Israel in his grace and in his mercy. I had a terrible attitude at the time. I was miserable and, oh my gosh, I should have been on my knees crying. And I was praying, but not the way I should have been praying. And God just gave me complete clarity. And in his grace, he said, here you go. If you do it my way and not your way, good things will happen. And I literally said, I'm sick of doing it my way. I'm going to do it your way from now on. And good things started to happen. Everything worked itself out with the living situation, my wife. Everything did because I took a step of obedience. And without that Israel trip, I don't know where I'd be. So I don't know where you are in your life. Everything might be peaches and cream. I hope it is. But if you have a nagging question or issue in your life or restlessness or lack of peace about something, get ready for a breakthrough when you're in Israel. I really say that. And Jerusalem, they say God is a local call in Jerusalem. And you feel the presence of God in Jerusalem like no other. Throughout the land, the Sea of Galilee, but fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be good. And let's close with Jerusalem. I want to take some questions. But this government we mentioned earlier, the prophetic implications possibly of it. Two things. The so-called status quo on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Now, the Temple Mount obviously was once home to the first and second temples. Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, so-called. They call the second temple Herod's temple because he did all these renovations on it. The mad builder, I call him, the mad king of Israel, King Herod. So the temples were there. Today, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the two Muslim holy sites, stand there. Now, Jews and Christians, the status quo, Jews and Christians are not allowed to pray atop the Temple Mount. You might say, what are you talking about? Jews prayed there 3,000 years ago. Solomon's temple, the Ark of the Covenant was inside that temple, and God's divine presence dwelt there. And you're telling me the Jews can't pray there? No, they can't. Neither can Christians. The temple where Jesus taught, where he chased out the money changers, where he taught as a 12-year-old boy when he left his parents, we can't pray there either. If Jews or Christians pray on the Temple Mount, you're either escorted off or even arrested. Only Muslims can pray on the Temple Mount. In fact, Muslims control the Temple Mount. The nation of Jordan is considered the custodian of the Temple Mount. You say, how does that happen? In 1967, the Six-Day War, Moshe Dayan, Remember the guy with the eye patch? The Israeli general? He did a lot of good things, but in this instance, I think he made a mistake. He agreed in his he said, look, we want to avoid a holy war. We've recaptured Jerusalem. It's ours once again. But he met with the Muslim religious authorities, and he said, we will allow you to maintain control over the Temple Mount. I think it was a mistake. And we see that now. I mean, Jews cannot pray on the Temple Mount where the temple once stood. It's outrageous. And more Jews are saying that now in Israel, hey, wait a minute. This isn't right. We should be able to go up there and say a prayer. You can't pray openly up there or you get arrested or escorted off the mount. So there's a kind of a groundswell among some Israelis saying, let us pray. This isn't right. They want to change that status quo. The world is howling, by the way, weeping and gnashing of teeth at the UN in Washington, D.C. and Brussels. They don't want to see it. Don't you dare change the status quo. Isn't that something? Not surprising. But between that and the number 2 point as we close here, the temple itself, there's also rumblings about a third temple. And observant Jews I talked to in Israel, in places like Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, in Jerusalem, they don't follow Jesus. They don't know Jesus. They don't know Yeshua. But they are God-fearing. They believe in the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They don't know the Messiah yet. But there's something there. And they have a hunger for the temple and to rebuild the temple. And they're talking about it and to make sacrifices to God. We believe the sacrifice was paid once and for all. It's finished. It is finished. They don't believe that. And they want to rebuild the temple and resume temple sacrifices. Now, on one hand, you might say, that's exciting. Hey, it's prophetic. The book of Revelation says there's going to be a third temple. Daniel talks about it. It's a sign that, Jesus is at the door. Indeed. But there's a flip side and a downside. We know as Christians that the Antichrist will eventually sit in that third temple and declare himself God. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's fascinating to see play out, exciting on one hand because time is kind of short. On the other hand, that the evil one is going to set up shop inside that rebuilt temple. So I hope I'm not here to see it. If I can sit on a cloud and look down, a little harp music. Nah, just kidding. But I don't think we will be here to see that as believers. But there's a few things. In the Middle East, nothing is certain, right? It's so unpredictable, so chaotic. But 2 things I know for certain. Jesus is coming back. He's going to set his foot down on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, not Berlin, Washington, D.C., or Beijing, in Jerusalem. And number 2, that third temple is going to be built. Good stuff, everybody. And hey, hopefully you're encouraged too, because as you can see, look, yes, the world is falling apart in many ways. Jan Markell, who I know John likes as well, says things aren't falling apart, they're falling into place. So be excited, be encouraged. God is moving, and hey, revival? Could we see? I know some people are saying America's done and there's no chance at all. And hey, obviously we're going down the wrong road. Am I pessimistic? Of course I am. It's hard not to be when you see what's going on in this country. But could God do something? The late 60s, early 70s, that Jesus movement, Generation Z today is lost. They're lost. They're looking for answers. Depression, anxiety, the COVID madness, it almost destroyed a generation. The gender madness. These kids are lost. They need Jesus. And that generation in the late 60s and early 70s was lost in many ways. They needed Jesus, and many of them found him. So, man, maybe the timing of these revivals on college campuses, the timing of this film being released, maybe we got something good here at the doorstep. We got to pray, right? Jesus never said, until I return, you just sit there on the couch, watch the Eagles, and wait for me. Hey, we got to stay proactive and keep praying. We're the body of Christ. We're salt and light. Folks, if we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. If we can't keep optimism and be ambassadors for Christ, no one else is going to do it. We've got a duty to do it. We've got a mandate from God Almighty. So be encouraged. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to do some Q&A. I have no, I won't. No. One of the things that we haven't touched on tonight, but we will one way or another probably go back to it. I think one of the questions that usually comes up, so I'll sort of bring it up so you have it in mind, Eric, is Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 49 dealing with the destruction of Damascus and where you might think we are in relationship to that.
Yeah.
But and then also Psalm 83. Many people, I've taught for a long time, many people believe that Psalm 83 is a prophecy, but it's a prophecy that speaks of, if we can, oh, what do you go home? Come on.
He was raptured.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, that's a good one. The one slide isn't in there, but Psalm 83 is a prophecy that talks about the nations that have borders contiguous to Israel, that declare war against Israel, that confederate and say we're going to drive them into the sea. That's a prophecy that's never been fulfilled. Now, some people believe other things. For example, Amir Tsarfati doesn't believe that.
Yeah,
Amir,
right.
Basically, I guess he teaches that that was the War of Independence.
Yes, I think he teaches it was 48. You're right.
And I love Amir. I just don't agree with him on it. But
yeah.
So that's an interesting prophecy. And some of you
had Bill Salas here a few months ago.
Salas is one of the guys.
Psalm 83 guy.
Yeah. So some of you may be very familiar with what I'm talking about, and others may not. And so rather than go into all that around, I just want to kind of say that there are some end time scenarios that the Bible speaks of that we always kind of come back to one way or the other. And so one way or the other, we'll kind of come back to those tonight. But there's the Psalm 83 war, the destruction of the prophesied destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17 and also in Jeremiah 49. And then, of course, Ezekiel 38 and 39, which, if you think about it now, remember Psalm 83, 8 and 3, and then 3:8, Ezekiel 38. In Psalm 83, it's the nations that actually share borders with Israel. Ezekiel 38 and 39 are nations like the Eastern Germanic countries, Gomer, Turkey, Meshech, Tubal, Magog, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya. Thank you. They don't share borders with Israel. So the one set of prophecy are nations that do share a border with Israel. The other one is nations that do not share a border with Israel, but they all have one thing in common. Many people say, yeah, they're all Arabs. No Arabs in there. They're Muslim. Technically speaking, Arabs are people who live in the Arabian Peninsula. So we have a tendency to call anybody who's not an Israeli an Arab, okay, which Persians don't care for. They really don't like it when you call them Arabs because they're Persians. They're very proud people. But they all share a religious hatred for Israel. So it's important that we kind of keep those things in mind because the Bible's very clear about those prophecies. And you may think, it's clear as mud to me. I mean, I don't understand how all that stuff works, which is fine if you don't understand it. But the Bible does speak of them. So I think we'll probably come back to those one way or another as we go through the night. So having said that, who'd like to start with a question? Yes, sir. And if you give us your name.
Jim Adicola.
Jim.
Do you think that Israel has nuclear weapons?
And I'm going to repeat the question just so it gets on the recording. But the question is, do you think that Israel has nuclear weapons?
Israel or Iran?
Israel.
Israel has nuclear weapons, yes.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
They for a long time, the idea was plausible deniability, but everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. Yeah.
Probably
Todd.
since the early 60s.
Yeah.
Todd. I'm wondering if it's propaganda or not, but you mentioned that Israel is in talks with Ukraine.
Yeah.
I was under the impression, with all that's going on since the beginning of the war, that there were a lot of anti-Semitism in Ukraine. Does
Oh,
that
yeah.
make it the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Is it one of those deals?
So Todd's asking the question
Good
that
question.
in light of Israel, kind of siding up with Ukraine,
Yeah.
what's the deal there, considering that we hear so much about anti-Semitism in
Yeah,
Ukraine?
I think, great question, Todd. I think historically, certainly during World War II, there was massive anti-Semitism in Ukraine. I mean, that's a historical fact. Some Ukrainians greeted the Nazis as liberators. I don't want to say liberators, but they joined, well, yeah, liberators in a sense, and they joined in with pogroms against Jews. But the Nazis saw the Ukrainians as Slavs and racial inferiors. So Ukrainians were also seen by the Nazis as racial inferiors. But there were Ukrainian Nazis at that time who subscribed to that ideology. Certainly, there were pogroms there, not only even before World War II, and in Russia as well. Serious pogroms against Jews. That's a historical fact. There is the Azov Battalion. You might have heard this name. These guys are Nazis. They're in eastern Ukraine. It's a few hundred guys. There is a segment there that has fought against Russia, this Azov Brigade, but the average Ukrainian soldier is not a Nazi. I mean, far from it. I mean, the president of Ukraine is Jewish. Other government officials there are Jewish. So yes, does anti-Semitism still exist in Ukraine? Yes, it does. But it's not a place where Jews are fearing for their lives or anything like that. So yes, the Azov Brigade is problematic. That one small battalion is kind of almost freelance mercenary type deal in Ukraine. But Israel, by and large, sees Ukraine not in that way, as a pro-Nazi regime like Russia would accuse. And again, it's tough to be a pro-Nazi regime when members of your ruling coalition are Jewish. So
Yeah.
I say all that to say, Ukraine, there's obviously a lot of corruption there. I mean, they're not saints, a lot of the folks in that country, and even in the leadership. So, it could be an unsavory ally for sure, if you're looking at it wide-eyed. I will say, and not all Ukrainians, by the way. There's some great people there fighting the good fight, no doubt. But there historically has been corruption there at the governmental level. I mean, that's a fact, too. So,
Good question.
yeah,
Other questions?
Very good question.
Joe.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, Joe.
I'm part of the group traveling to Israel next fall. First time I'll be in Israel with my wife and the church.
Great.
So my question is, as I grew up in the 70s, there was a lot of nonsense we used to see on the news with all kind of stuff going through Israel, a lot of killings, whatever. So I know John has since relaxed us about that. It's a much
Yeah.
safer place to travel. Since you were there recently, what's the temperature being inside?
He wants to know if I've been lying to him. That's what he wants to know.
How much that guy?
You're my security guy.
Need
in this group.
confirmation. Joe, I got to tell you, I mean, I feel completely safe in Israel, and I'm not just saying that like, oh, you'll be fine. No, I really feel. I always have. I've been to Israel 26 times, 27 times, and every time I feel safe. It's such a fascinating place, and there was protesters this time, but at the Knesset, out of range. A lot of times in Israel, I find when I'm there, stuff happens in different parts of the country, but I feel completely removed. If I'm in Jerusalem, something's happening on the Gaza border, it might as well be another world away. I know it's not, but it really, you'll feel it when you're there. It's a special place, and you'll be with people, guides. John's been to Israel many times, and you'll be with guides, Israelis, who know every inch of the land. They're great fixers, you would say that term, but you're going to be fine, really. You're not going to go, into Gaza or on the Gaza border. You're not going to go.
Not for long.
Yeah, not for long. You might make a pit stop there for gas. That's it. But yeah, so honestly, I feel safe. People ask me this all the time, and this will sum it up for you, Joe. This will give you an idea. I feel safer in Jerusalem at midnight than I do in Philly, New York, or D.C.
Oh,
Without a doubt.
Absolutely.
And that's the truth.
Absolutely.
You will see when you're there. It's such I can't really put into words, I guess, in a way. It's such a fascinating society in that there's not a lot of petty street crime or anything like that in Israel. There's really not. And you see, of course, it's not perfect. I mean, there's some crime, and obviously there's terror here and there, you know. But it's the kind of place where you grew up in the 70s. I was a child of the 80s and the 90s. But you still see kids walking to school alone without their parents. You'll see like a 6 or 7-year-old kid, like I used to, with their school bag, walking to school alone without a parent.
Yeah.
You never see that in the States today. My gosh, I mean, you're smothering your kid, and you never know what's going to happen. So it's that kind of society. It's very close-knit. It's almost like a big, small town. You'll see. And everyone looks out for everybody. You'll feel very, very safe. You will.
Yeah.
No problem.
Good question. Because I know many people think about it, and I joke about it, but I'm glad someone could.
You really
that,
will,
yeah.
Joe. I wouldn't steer you wrong. Believe me.
Yeah.
People ask me all the time, believe me, and my wife even. So, yeah, I would definitely, if I would take my own family, my wife, my daughters, believe me, I don't mess around with that.
What's the shawarma?
Now, don't push it, Joe.
This is extra.
What is shawarma?
Ah, shawarma?
No,
man.
no. You can't tell people what shawarma is, man.
I crave it.
Come on.
crave-
Explain it.
Yeah, shawarma.
Nothing like it.
Have you ever seen, you may have been in a place or on TV, it almost looks like a beehive, and the guy's chopping it, this
Like
meat.
a gyro. Yeah.
It's like with a meat cleaver. Shawarma is absolutely delicious. I recommend everyone try it. Get it in like a pita, or they call it a laffa. You put pickle on it, all sorts of good stuff, tahini, hummus. You got to go on the treadmill afterwards. But it's delicious. You got to try shawarma. I crave it. When I'm not in Israel, I crave the food.
Oh, yeah.
The falafel, the shawarma, the hummus. Oh, my gosh. You guys are going to come back 10 pounds heavier, but you'll be fat and happy.
Hummus is hummus, man.
Yeah.
David's got a question.
Yeah, my name's David, obviously. Thank you. I've read that I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, the Pool of Siloam, or Siloam?
Pool Siloam.
Siloam,
Yeah.
The mikveh, if that's opening, and
Yes, it's going to.
and in relation to the third temple, do they have a site yet, and is this possibly?
So 2 questions that David has.
Yeah.
One is that he's been reading about how the Pool of Siloam is being reopened, and the other has to do with a site for the third temple. I'll just say the Pool of Siloam has always been, I'll say, open,
Yeah.
in the sense that you come out of Hezekiah's tunnel and you come out into the Pool of Siloam. But what they've done now is with all of the work they've done in excavating the city of David. Sorry, I'm stealing your thunder here.
No, this is good.
They have further uncovered it, and their plans are to open it up further so more people can fit in and to see it. So,
Yeah.
what's the site for the third
There you
temple?
go. Nah. You're exactly right, City of David. And I was just one nugget. I was supposed to do a shoot there a few weeks ago when I was in Israel and see what they're doing at the Pool of Siloam and the pilgrimage road. The other exciting thing, the Pool of Siloam, where you had to ritually cleanse yourself before you went up to the temple. Jesus was in that pool.
Yeah.
He went up to the temple. He was an observant Jew. The disciples, they were in that pool. They cleansed themselves, went up to the temple. The road of pilgrimage
he wasn't a
leads right
Christian?
to the temple. Yeah, he was. John was a Baptist. Mary was Catholic, and Jesus was Presbyterian. Right now. No, but he really did. The Jewish Jesus went up the pilgrimage
That's right.
road, and they're excavating all this now, David. It's amazing. And I had to cancel the shoot. Do you believe it? I couldn't do the shoot because we were getting the foreign minister. And I said, well, I can do City of David. I've done it many times. But I said, got to get the foreign minister. It was a big get, as they say.
So what do you think about the third temple?
Third temple.
You want to know
listen.
the site for it,
The
right?
site, and if
Okay.
Yeah,
it's going to be a significant piece of where maybe the site.
Yeah, David, great question. I've been on the Temple Mount many times, and it's huge. I mean, it is
35 acres.
Right. It's a massive plaza. It's the size of a few football fields. I mean, that thing is big up there. It's deceiving on TV. You see the Gold Dome, you see the mosque. It's massive up there. You could conceivably fit the temple up there, no doubt, today. It would fit, no doubt. Now, how is it going to happen? It's going to be there, I believe, but how is it going to happen? Will something happen to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Earthquake, war, something like that? Will the Antichrist broker a treaty where they say, okay, build the temple alongside those Muslim shrines? We don't know, but they definitely, I'm sure they have kind of an X marks the spot up on the Temple Mount, but how close, maybe a little distance away from the Muslim shrines, I don't know. But it'll be I know there's a strain of thought now online. The temples were not on the Temple Mount. They're in the city of David. I strongly disagree.
Yeah,
And it's
that's
kind of a
not
it's,
true.
it's not true. And it's kind of a moot point anyway, because when they build the temple, they're going to build it on the Temple Mount.
Yeah. So to clarify a little bit more, yes, first of all, there's some stuff you'll see on YouTube. And people who, like Bob Cornuke and some names you may know,
Yeah.
are behind this idea
He's the guy.
of there's an alternative site for the third temple, or that the temple was at a different place than everybody thinks. It's brain candy, but it's not true.
Yeah. To me, John, just a quick
yeah.
thing on that. And you talk about, David, the Pool of Siloam and the Road of Pilgrimage. Once they uncovered that Road of Pilgrimage, to me, that was the smoking
Yeah,
gun.
amen.
It goes right
goes one
up
direction.
to the temple. Yeah, it goes right up to the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
So to me, that...
Right.
And also, the city of David is kind of below the Temple Mount. The historians say the temple, you could see it from miles away. It was gleaming. It
Yeah.
towered above everything else. The city of David is below the Temple Mount, so that doesn't make
It's
sense.
not on a
just
mountaintop.
the
Yeah.
topography. Yeah.
And we, you might have been here some weeks ago. We did in the Hebrews 11 study. We did a thing on the Abraham sacrifice of Isaac. So we don't have the stuff to put up on the screen now, but the site of Solomon's temple, the site of the second temple, and what is currently the Temple Mount, are all in a place that was Ornan's threshing floor. David bought the threshing floor, 2 Chronicles. He bought the threshing floor from Ornan, and he did that in order to provide the real estate for Solomon later on to build the temple there. So the Bible's clear on where that is, which is the Temple Mount today. The pregnant question is, how does it come about? Because the third holiest site in Islam, that the gold dome structure, is sitting right there. I think the answer comes down to, many Jews in Israel have many ideas on this, but Daniel chapter 9 tells us that there's a great world leader who's going to come about. It begins in, I'm not going to go teaching Daniel 9 tonight, but beginning in verse 24, so verses 24 through 27, says that this great world leader will confirm a covenant with Israel, and who? It seems to be with the rest of the world. Confirm a covenant, and so the question is, how does that come about? Why does that come about? However it comes about, he confirms this covenant, and it appears that, doesn't say it in Daniel, but appears that that's what provides the ability now for Israel to begin to construct that third temple. Now the question as to where on the Temple Mount, there are 13 different opinions, literally, 3 major different opinions. One is where the Dome of the Rocks sits. Some people believe that's where the Holy of the Holies was. That's the question. It has to be where the Holy of the Holies was. Others say, no, it's to the north of that. Others say it's to the south of that, but all on the Temple Mount. And so none of us here know that, but it's going to be there. And apparently this great world leader is going to confirm this covenant that allows Israel to do this. What happens from there is going to be pretty exciting, I would say.
You know, it's interesting, too, in Abu Dhabi, of all places, in the UAE. Did you see this, Pastor John? They just opened a mosque, a church, and a synagogue all next to each other.
Yeah.
Interesting. I was there in Abu Dhabi in April and talking to some of the folks behind it. These young Arab guys are Western educated, energetic, and they're like, this is great, all faiths together, and, that's...
Looks good on paper.
It looks good on paper. Exactly. So, interesting.
Other questions? Jill.
With Abbas getting older,
I like how you said his name, Jill. Abbas.
yes, with him getting older,
Yeah.
is who do you think, how do you see whether he's moved or he dies or he wants to step down?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen with that?
So the question has to do with Abbas, the head of Hamas in Gaza, with him getting older, quite old actually. He's pretty much falling off
87.
the scene, with him getting that old, what happens next?
Yeah.
And how do you see that playing
President
out?
for life of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. Abu
Like Idi
Mazen.
Amin. Yeah.
Yes, right. He's 87. Mahmoud Abbas. Jill, you make a great point. Good to see you, by the way. Good question, because every potential successor to Mahmoud Abbas seems to end up in jail. Like any potential competitor, He's going to be president until he dies, unless he's overthrown. Now, I think he was elected, quote unquote, 2005.
Yes.
It was supposed to be a
6
four-year
or
term,
7.
I think, or like
Yeah,
5.
right.
Now it's an 18-year term. What happens next in the Palestinian Authority is very unpredictable. There's two kind of halves here. In the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, it's run by the Palestinian Authority, the PA for short. Mahmoud Abbas is the president of the Palestinian Authority. These are the guys who the world says, that's Israel's partner for peace. Israel can talk to these guys. They can deal with Abbas. He's a man of peace. He says one thing in English and another thing in Arabic, put it that way. So that's one half of it. And there's a Hamas presence in the West Bank as well, but Hamas rules Gaza with an iron fist. If we had that, well, it's probably too tiny to even point
Israel?
out.
Yeah.
Do we have the Israel map? We could show that maybe real quick. Gaza
The first
right
map,
here.
Israel? Oh.
This is Hamas right here. Gaza. This is Hamas's turf. And here is Mahmoud Abbas, all around here, the West Bank. Now, this is where a good chunk of your Bible took place, by the way, Judea and Samaria. In 2007, Hamas violently evicted the Palestinian Authority from Gaza. They kicked them out. They threw Palestinian Authority guys off of the top of buildings. Very pleasant chaps, Hamas. So you have the Palestinian society is split. Abbas on one side, Hamas on the other. Now the fear is that Hamas is going to just overthrow the whole thing in the West Bank as well. And I got to tell you, Jill, great question, because if Abbas dies, if and when, all bets are off. I think you could see chaos and complete disarray. There's been a few guys who've been bandied about as possible successors to Abbas. But again, Mohammed Daklan was one, not to get too in the weeds with names. These guys end up in prison half the time. So he really has no competitors right now other than Hamas, which I think when he dies does not bode well. I think it's going to be chaotic. Whatever succession happens there, I would think it won't be smooth.
Yeah, I agree with you. Other questions? John?
Eric, in your experience, have you seen any number of people, even a small number of people, in military, in political leadership, and or in spiritual leadership in Israel that are thinking prophecy?
Excuse me. I heard everything except that who are.
Are they thinking prophecy? Are they looking at their role? Is anyone over there in leadership, military, political,
Got it.
or spiritual,
Yeah.
looking at prophecy the way we?
So John's asking for anybody who
Great
can't hear it
question.
over there.
Great question.
In your experience,
Yeah.
do you come across anybody, military, politically, et cetera, who's really looking at biblical prophecy and helping to guide their perspective on things?
Politically, they are aware. John, great question. Politically, they are aware. Some political figures I've interviewed. Benjamin Netanyahu is aware.
Yeah.
He's talked about Ezekiel 36 and he's talked about Ezekiel 37, the dry bones prophecy.
Right.
He's actually talked
And
about
38
that.
and 39.
And 38 and 39. This is Bibi. He is aware. He's heard the stories growing up. He's heard the sages. He's aware. Is he going to go out and talk about it openly like we are all the time? Probably not on the political world stage, but he's aware. He's certainly aware. Zaki Hanegbi, he is a top, I believe he's running Israel's National Security Council now, very close to Bibi. I interviewed him about 3 years ago, and he said the Bible said, we were talking about Hezbollah, Lebanon, we just talked about a few minutes ago. He said the Bible says the threat will come from the north. In the future, the threat will come from the north. This is Zaki and Egby. And these guys are secular. They're looked at as secular. They're not wearing a yarmulke, the kippah, or anything like that. But they're aware. So there's an awareness, not an on-fire, Holy Spirit-informed awareness that we have.
Right.
Where everything we see, we're like, okay, that just happened. What does the Bible say about that? Does that have biblical significance? So they don't have that, but there's an awareness. They know their existence in Israel is not a coincidence. They know God exists. That's in the political class. The military class, those guys keep things close to the vest. They're not going to play their cards at all, in my experience. But there are definitely more and more, they would say, religious Israelis in the military, even in some of the leadership positions. Lastly, the spiritual. Certainly there are rabbis in Israel who talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39 a lot, the war of Gog and Magog, and many believe in Israel that we are in the Messianic age. They think it's going to be his first time and not his second time. We believe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. They don't believe that, but there's an awareness and a growing hunger, a growing hunger for the Messiah. I have observant Jewish friends in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, guys at the city of David, some of my dear friends, and they're craving the Messiah. They're going to be surprised when they see him, who it is.
Well, I would add to that some of you know that Jill Petrie heads up a nonprofit organization called the Almond Branch, not Olive, Almond Branch Initiative. It's taken from Jeremiah chapter 1. And the Almond Branch Initiative has sought to help many in Israel. I mean, the charter is basically to help those in need. There are many below the poverty line, like 27% of the population. But much of the work that Almond Branch has done over the years has been with the military. And she can tell you many stories. I know of a few where we were involved in one in particular, one of the special ops groups, Duv Davan. Duv Davan means cherry in Hebrew. And I remember asking the commander there one time, so Duv Davan means cherry, and you do some pretty wild things. Why do you call yourselves cherry? You're big macho guys. Why? Well, you know, cherries are a beautiful fruit, and some are very good for you, and some are poison. And but I'll never forget, having opportunity to speak with this one particular commander, Moti, and Jill and Renee and some others have had many opportunities to pray with him. I mean, actually, to send people out of his office and to allow women, you got to think this is a Middle Eastern society, to allow women to lay hands on him and to pray for him. And actually for him to say to others in his command, to say, no, they teach me the Bible. And have an awareness of what God's word says about who Messiah is and what God says about what's happening in their land. So I say that because in terms of the military, there are people who understand. Yeah. I think, we got to remember, when it comes to the intelligence services, they're interested in all aspects of intelligence. And they understand. They're Israeli, of all people in the world. They understand. They have a Bible. They read it. Not everybody, but they do read parts of it. And so where it comes to prophecy, they're aware of those things. Finally, it's important that we remember, and those of you women who've been involved in the Friday morning Bible study are aware of this, because Jill's been teaching a lot on Israel in Romans. And I think it's important that we remember Israel is the only people group on planet Earth who have a special blinding by God. The Bible says the God of this age has blinded, the mind of all who don't believe, which is true. But Israelis in particular have a special kind of blinding. I'm not going to go into all that tonight, but that's something that's hard for us to understand sometimes, because we think, if you were a blind man and I said, come out, look at that sunset, isn't it beautiful? And Erick says, I can't see it, I'm blind. I said, no, try harder, man. Well, that's our attitude. People, many of you on tour are going to say, at some point on the tour, listen, how can they live here and see all this Bible played out in front of them and them not believe in Jesus? They're blinded. And that doesn't mean the Holy Spirit doesn't work through there. So it's an interesting situation that's going on.
It certainly is.
Questions?
I second that.
Others? Tim?
So question for you, it's kind of a two-part, but with Russia and some of what you were talking about earlier, I know initially Russia was involved in Syria primarily because of ISIS and some of the revolution and things like that.
Yes.
What's their marching order now? So that's part one of my question.
Yeah, good question.
And then part two is, with everything, I keep seeing in the mainstream media, Russia's forces are being decimated in Ukraine, and they have the Wagner group that's being decimated. Is that causing any of the Russian troops to recoil throughout the world, or are they actually becoming more aggressive in places like the Middle East?
Yeah, I think not in the Middle East yet. Good question. A few things there. You made some great points. Number one, why did Russia enter Syria originally? At the behest of Iran. Qasem Soleimani, the not so dearly departed terror master, you remember him? Eliminated in a drone strike January 2020. The President Trump ordered the world's most dangerous terrorist, second or third most powerful man in the entire Iranian government. That tells you where they're coming from. The second or third most powerful figure in their government is a terrorist. He went to Moscow twice in 2015 to implore Vladimir Putin to get involved in Syria. Assad was on his heels, and Iran were on their heels. They were taking lumps in Syria. ISIS was ascendant at the time, these jihadis, and they were fighting. It was jihadi versus jihadi in Syria. You had two sides of the same coin, Iran and Hezbollah versus ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
Have at it, boys. Go ahead. Do you need extra weapons to off each other? So that was going on. Assad was on the ropes. Russia got involved and turned the tide completely. Assad now, he prevailed. I mean, the civil war's over. There's still pockets of resistance. He's clamped down. It's over with the help of Iran and Russia. Russia decided they want to stay. And the reason they want to stay, I think, is simple. Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire. He wants to rebuild the Russian Empire. Russia was always a player. The Soviets were always a player in the Middle East during the Soviet era. Always have had a very close relationship with Bashar al-Assad now, his father, Hafez Assad, before him, in the days of the Six-Day War, that period. So Russia's always been involved. They have proximity there to a warm water port on the Mediterranean, which they need. Proximity to oil and gas, and Russia sees themselves as the energy superpower in the world. The vast reserves of natural gas, oil. So there's a lot of strategic reasons for them to be there. And I think the biggest reason, second biggest, I should say, the biggest is if you want to project power in the world, it seems like the Middle East, like a hook in the jaw, just kind of pulls you in. And if you want to be a power player in the world, you must have a presence in that region. It seems just unavoidable. Vladimir Putin wants to rebuild Russia's prestige in the world. So that's another reason to be there. The biggest reason is, prophetically, I think it has to happen. There will be that hook in the jaw, and he's going to be in the Middle East. So he's there to stay. In Ukraine, what's happening right now is undoubtedly, if he wants to rebuild Russia's prestige, it's gone in the opposite direction over the past 13 months. I mean, by some accounts, they have lost 100,000 troops in 13 months in Ukraine. I mean, that's madness.
They're actually recruiting in women's prisons right now in Russia.
Well, I've seen some of the Russian women who compete in the Olympics in previous years.
No, it's probably a wise move, actually.
But I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. But it was fun. But here's one thing to think about. Putin's not going to go quietly.
Right.
And I said this today. Western leaders, whether it's Biden in the UK, Germany, whatever, France, Macron, they are saying we are going to defeat Russia in Ukraine. They're openly saying it. Our goal here is the defeat of Russia in Ukraine. Hey, it sounds great, right? I don't want Russia to succeed there either. But it's naive in that, do you really think Vladimir Putin is just going to accept defeat and go quietly into the night? He's going to say, guys, you know what? Let's wrap it up. Let's go back to Russia. Let's cross the border back home.
Never mind.
We tried. We gave it a good try, but we just couldn't prevail over Ukraine. Do you really think he's going to do that, folks? He knows if he does that, there's two options. Number one, he will be pushed out of power and sent into exile. Number two, he will lose his life, and he knows that. So he's more likely to go down swinging, and I mean hard, meaning it's going to get worse before it gets better. He's going to throw, and he's held back so far. He's going to throw if the rubber hits the road and he feels like they might lose, he's going to throw everything but the kitchen sink at Ukraine before he just accepts defeat. And for Western leaders to naively think, well, we're going to defeat him there. You can weaken him, and that's a good thing.
Right.
But he's not just going to accept a defeat there. I think it's naive to believe that. He's going to go all in. He's gone all in. He has to win. He has no other option but victory. Is he going to get victory? I don't know, but he will kill as many people as he needs to try and get it, to try and secure it, because the alternative is he may lose his life.
And if I could, there's another, there's always the story you see on TV, and then what's the story behind the story? And not that I have the corner on it. I agree with you. You trap a rat in a corner, you're going to get bit.
Right.
And that's the issue there with Putin.
Yeah.
But I suppose that the average American looks at Ukraine and the war and why we're funding what's going on there as we see it as a righteous situation. It's unrighteous, it's wrong for Russia to have invaded, and therefore we're going to support the Ukrainians. That's how the average American sees that, and I think that's nice.
Yeah.
Except I think it's also naive. The U.S. It's been pretty well substantiated that the United States, many of us, even in this room, weren't. Well, some of us, a lot of us, were living during the Cold War, but a lot were not. But during the Cold War, the U.S. had, we stood up listening posts and intelligence operations, CIA intelligence operations in Ukraine. There's a lot we don't want discovered in Ukraine. There's a lot that's of our strategic interest. It's not just about protecting them from an aggressor. So there's a lot more at play here than typically is seen.
Yes, I'm with you. Putin's an evil man, that no doubt. It was an evil act to invade Ukraine, but there's other things.
Now there were, excuse me, I saw a couple hands there. Okay.
So I lived in Australia for 6 years, from 2008 to 2013.
Okay.
And saw the ripple effect of the economy as it ended, started here and went there, with the 16th largest bank collapsing last week. What do you think is going to happen with the economy in the Middle East, or are you seeing signs? And with the war in Ukraine, all of
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. We just moved out of the Middle East in one regard.
Yeah.
But this is a topic that a lot of us may not be thinking much about, or maybe are.
Yeah.
With Silicon Valley Bank folding last week, and then the second one right behind that, and then even now today, Credit Suisse shares dropped. It was 25% early in the day. I'm not sure how far it went beyond that. What might be the implications there for the Middle East, and of course in a broader sense. But and in terms of the Credit Suisse Bank dropping 25%, part of the reason for that is Saudi Arabia's they had investments that were up to 10% of Credit Suisse's balance sheet. So they withdrew that, and when they withdrew that early this morning for our calendar, that's when the shares really began to plummet. So there's that domino effect involved. So now you put your banking hat on, international finance. What do you think?
This is where my eyes glaze over. No, I would just say simplistically, there will be ripple effects around the world, including the Middle East, I think, first. One thing is interesting. In 2008, Israel kind of, I don't want to say they were unscathed, but they made out better than most.
Oh, they did better than us.
In 2008, they did. Just interesting there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think Israel, the internal continued friction is not a good thing. That's another story, which they're concerned about the economic consequences there because of all the internal unrest. But I think just in a broader sense, the economic upheaval is laying the groundwork. There's a term. It's not just a term. It's a reality. It's called the Great Reset. Has anyone heard this used?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a conspiracy theory when they're actually saying it.
Right.
I'm working on a special about it right now for TBN. When Pastor John will let you know the air date. I think it's April 18th. It's going to air. We're in the process of working on this, digging into this, uncovering. Part of this Great Reset is a digital currency. Mm-hmm. And it could be the mark of the beasts. Take a mark. All your information right here. Just swipe your hand at the grocery store, and there you go. I think that this is laying the groundwork for that. There's definitely a desire for a digital currency and a digital ID, by the way, among the elites, the people involved with the Great Reset. So I think this, in a broader sense, is laying the groundwork for that. So it's not shocking, for sure. But I think we're definitely moving towards a digital currency.
Absolutely.
And the Biden administration wants it. They've been doing research on it, trying to develop a digital currency. So that's at the doorstep, I think. And I think the collapse of these banks is going to hasten that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Jim. Jim, by the way, this man back here is a friend of mine. We met in American Democracy class, in Henry Holland's American Democracy class, University of Denver, January 1973. We've been friends ever since. Otherwise known as the Dude. So, Dude, what's your question?
Big Lebowski.
Eric, you speak of the hook in the jaw, and I was thinking of the possibility of the
Louder, dude.
China's biggest commitment to the Belt and Road Initiative
Yeah.
goes through Pakistan.
Yeah.
And those roads and railroads could easily lead to the back door of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous supply line for China through the back door to supply Russia. And if you look at the Caspian Sea by Iran, they can easily supply the Russians very close to the current war. Thank you. I was wondering if that would be a hook in the jaw in that Iran would be controlling.
So in summary, in summary for everybody, and for the recording, in summary, Ezekiel 38, God says, I will put hooks in the jaw of Magog, Russia, and draw you in along with these allies, along with Persia and Gomer and all these others. And so what he's asking has to do with how does the Belt and Road Initiative, roads, railways, et cetera.
Yeah.
Can we put up the third map? So the Belt and Road Initiative basically bringing rail and roads, et cetera, through Persia, working therefore through Iran, with the Caspian Sea, et cetera, involved. How do you see those things working together is that part of possibly one of the hooks in the jaw?
Wow. In terms of the hooks in the jaw, I've always thought of that possibly being natural gas. Israel has these large natural gas deposits off the coast of the Mediterranean. Will that be what brings Russia down? But the Belt and Road Initiative could certainly be a way for Russia and its allies, they could use that. They could use this network that China is building to come down to the Middle East, for sure. The Belt and Road Initiative is a scary thing because China is basically trying to connect the world, even though continents are separated by oceans. Whether it's Africa, even South America, Latin America now, China is trying to build infrastructure on every continent in the world. So it's not a joke. It's not a coincidence they brokered this treaty between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But the hook in the jaw, I've tended to think it's Russia drawn with the hook, Russia in that alliance, not necessarily China. But the Belt and Road Initiative could be something, that they could use in terms of transport, I guess.
I'm sorry? It's very possible that Iran could use it, but I agree with Eric that while we don't know that it's natural gas, more recently, because Israel has developed what's called the Leviathan gas field, which is just off the coast in the Mediterranean, they have enormous natural gas supply. And they're beginning to offer it now to Europe.
Right. I was just gonna
interestingly
say.
enough. So we've seen it more recently as natural gas. I think a lot of people forget about the fact that in Genesis 14, one of the prophecies about the tribe of Asher, that Asher will dip his foot in oil. So if you're familiar with Zion Oil and Gas Company,
know them well.
They've begun drilling. They have leases to drill in Israel for oil based upon that biblical prophecy.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a stock that has gone nowhere, just in case you're getting excited. But but in any event, so some people have said perhaps it's because it says hooks in the jaw, but later on it says to Magog, you've come in for a plunder, to take plunder or to take booty, same thing. And that being the case, it could be something like a natural resource, because Israel's rich in natural resources.
Right.
The Dead Sea is an enormous natural resource. Most of us just say, well, it's dead. Who cares? No, it's a natural, full of minerals that industry needs. And so there are a lot of things like that have seen. But so, Jill, you got your.
Just following up on that, I don't know if they ever declared who is responsible for blowing up the Greek-Israeli gas pipeline, but are they going to be rebuilding that? Because I think
just gonna say.
hooking somebody back.
Yes, it's interesting, Jill. There's conversations right now. Netanyahu was in Rome a few days ago, over the weekend.
Yeah.
He met with the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who's a firebrand. She's great. But when he was there, he said, look, we want to supply not only Italy, but all of Europe with more natural gas. We want to help you. Remember, there's a vacuum now. Europe and Russia are on the outs after the Ukraine war. Europe needs more energy. Russia was their main energy supplier. That's out the window now. Israel's kind of stepping into the void and saying, hey, we can make up at least some of that natural gas. We're glad to help. We've got a bunch of it, like Pastor John said. They're talking about, even on Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, maybe building a liquefied natural gas facility where a pipeline, I guess, would go through Cyprus and on its way up into Europe. There's been talk of, I think it's called the East Med pipeline, actually. The Biden administration said, no, don't do it. They didn't want to see it. It wasn't green enough. It didn't meet environmental standards. But Israel may very well do that. They've been shipping natural gas through Egypt en route to some places. So that's all on the table, Jill. It really is. It won't happen overnight, but Israel in the next few years is going to become more and more a natural gas superpower. And I think that makes conflict with Russia inevitable in that sense, because Russia, again, sees itself, I think John McCain called it a giant gas station, the country of Russia. So Russia really sees itself as the source for natural gas. They're not going to like this little upstart Israel stealing their thunder and stepping into the void and all of a sudden supplying others with natural gas and taking Russia's place.
Yeah.
So.
2 questions. Mike,
All right, so just
stand up and speak up.
comment and question. So you two, about 4 years ago, I had a daughter in Tunisia, a daughter in a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan, and my son was in Philadelphia at the Germantown Project,
Okay.
4 miles from my house. He was got a bunkering place because they were getting shot at. So he wasn't safe in Philly, but they were safe in Tunisia and
Okay.
Syrian refugee camp.
All right.
Second question, the question though is, if Israel was to strike Iran, would they get attacked from Hezbollah, Hamas, and Russia?
Yeah, I don't know about Russia at first, but I think Hezbollah and Hamas, yes. If and when Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, it's interesting. I said earlier I'm not a military strategist, but you would think, the response from Hezbollah is coming. It's inevitable. And the interesting thing is, Iran has been holding Hezbollah in reserve. Hezbollah is their ace in the hole. That's their most lethal weapon. Last time Hezbollah was used in a major way was the summer of 2006. Major war with Israel. They took a lot of lumps. And since 2006, 17 years, Hezbollah has held its fire by and large. And Iran has held them in reserve as they build up their stockpiles. They have 150,000 rockets and missiles now. 30,000, 40,000 foot soldiers. They're a lethal fighting force, one of the most powerful fighting forces in the entire Middle East. And they're not even a nation state, but they're backed by a nation state. They're backed by Iran. That is the moment, if Israel strikes Iran's nuclear program, that Iran might activate Hezbollah in response.
So. Yeah.
So you would think, again, I'm not a military strategist, but you would think that Israel may preemptively strike Hezbollah. Hey, they're going to hit us. We know they're going to react if we hit the nuclear program. Let's preemptively strike them. Kind of like the 6-Day War. You struck the Egyptian Air Force on the ground before they even got in their planes and the war was over. Could Israel preemptively strike Hezbollah? Possibly. But I call it the ring of fire that surrounds Israel. Hezbollah to the north, Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq and Syria. Iran wants to activate that ring of fire and bombard Israel from all sides. Yeah. So when Israel takes action, you may see that ring of fire activated for sure. I think Russia comes into the picture later on.
Yeah. And all that after April 25th.
Yeah.
Final question over here. Dave.
My question is, can you talk about the judicial reform that they're trying to get through?
Yeah, this is interesting. Long story short here, this can be a complex thing. Israel does not have a constitution. It's not like the United States where we have a constitution, number one. Number two, it's not like the United States in that the president selects the Supreme Court justice, and then he has to be confirmed. And he goes through grueling Senate testimony. That's not the case in Israel.
Right.
Basically, the judges pick the judges. And the judges, surprise, surprise, as in many places in the world, in Israel, are predominantly left-wing. So you have kind of a left-wing echo chamber in the courts in Israel at the highest level. And Israel's new government doesn't like that. They say, look, we want to even it out a little bit in the judiciary. We need to, it's slanted too much to the left, and we don't have enough say, and they have too much say. So they're trying to overhaul the judiciary and change that and even out the court more. And I think the protests you're seeing are a sign of the times. There's a general sense in the world, not a sense, a reality of instability and chaos.
Yeah.
People in the streets, everywhere you look, every continent, protests, people in the streets, instability, chaos, political unrest, everywhere you look. Israel's not immune. It's the spirit of the age. So where it ends up is a good question. I don't think Bibi's coalition's going anywhere. I said to Pastor John on the phone yesterday, man, I'd find it hard to believe that God brought Bibi back in this position for such a time as this, and then after 2 or 3 months his coalition collapses. Anything could happen. It's not beyond the realm of possibility, but I would think, and Bibi is a master politician, he's maneuvers, I would think he'll find a way through this. I don't know if that means some kind of compromise, but the protests are predominantly led by the left. It's not all leftists. There's some who aren't on the left who are also protesting, but predominantly the left is who is protesting Netanyahu and protesting these reforms. They could have possibly waited a little bit more before ramming it through right away, maybe waited a few months before making this the first thing on their agenda, but they decided, hey, we're going to push it right through. And there's echoes of Trump, I think, for sure. I mean, from the moment he took office, there was, boom, opposition from the opposition, from Democrats, from the media, relentless investigations, all of it, protests from the moment he took office. I was at the inauguration, 2017, covering it for TBN. Thousands of protesters. I mean, Bibi took office December 30th, I think he was sworn in right away. Opposition. And folks, I think, last thing I'll say, in a larger sense, we talk about the Great Reset, and we talk about the desire for a one world digital currency, a one world government ruled by one leader, eventually. His initials are AC. But what are the two nations really, traditionally, that have been fiercely sovereign and nationalistic and have stood in the way of that agenda? The United States and Israel. Now, in 2016, Trump's victory took them all by surprise. They thought Hillary was going to get in, and we're off to the races here, global government. So they can't stand Netanyahu because he's against their agenda. They couldn't stand Trump. They'll hate DeSantis because they oppose that agenda. So expect fierce opposition to Bibi and to, if a Republican is able to win the presidency in 2024, expect fierce opposition. It's a sign of the times, a spirit of the age. And remember, the U.S. and Israel, in the globalist view, that's two dominoes that have to fall to bring in a global government.
Yeah. I would, just wrapping this up, I think it's good to have, I think, this perspective, which is we see what's going on in the world. I mean, most of us have a very American perspective on things, so we just see the things going on in our right in front of us in our country, and we go on with our lives. We start to broaden out our perspective, and now we're looking at Israel, and we it's almost as if we're trying to judge: are they doing this right, doing that right? They're judging. Bibi's doing what he believes is right to do. Yeah. To Erick's point, you have two nations. I know I've grinded with my kids on this over all the years. You look at world history, there are only two nations. Biblical Israel, especially in its golden age under David, and America, especially in our ripest time, when we loved the Lord for the most part as a nation, and we sought to do the righteous thing, and we fought righteous wars. You take those two nations compared to all the other nations on planet Earth. We always stand out in that regard. Yeah. And now if you look at it in a 21st century perspective, these two leaders, Netanyahu and Trump, are nationalistic. They're not globalists. Nationalist is used as a pejorative. You're a nationalist, like you're a Nazi.
Yes.
No, you stand for your nation. That's all that means. And so we have to forget what the media is saying. Just look at it in reality. Trump, regardless of your politics, Trump is for America. That's what he means by being a nationalist. And Netanyahu is for Israel. And they're not globalists. They fight the globalist agenda. The media is globalistic. I mean, you start to go down the list, all the major corporations, they're all part of this globalist agenda. Yeah. So we hear the news filtered through that, almost regardless of what your news source is. It's being filtered through a globalist filter. And so we can, even as Christians who should know better, we can start to think, oh, these guys are bad news. No, they're not. They're doing the right thing. That doesn't mean they're not sinners. But all I'm saying is, but here we are in these last days. To your point, the mood of the times, everybody's protesting. No matter, you pick a country in Western Europe, they're protesting. They're protesting in Russia. They're protesting in Iran. They're protesting in China. There are protests going on more than really in any other time in the world history when all the peoples of the world are protesting. I believe, no time for that tonight, but that's in Daniel. We read some of that in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7. So to me, those things all reinforce that these are the days that we're living in, meaning the last days at the end of the age. The question is, how close are we in the end of the age? That's what everybody always wants to know. None of us know. But we're very close. You can just tell by looking at the things that are going on through a biblical lens. And Jesus says, when you see these things taking place, then lift up your eyes, because your redemption is drawing near. It's important for us, as much as I love my country, and I am an American, but I'm looking for Jesus Christ. You know, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for him. I'm looking for his rule. And, you know, it's not like we're all turning around. Will there be a revival? I've had a sense in one way for a long time that God will do that before the rapture. How do I know that? I don't. I just have that sense. That doesn't mean we're going to see it. But one thing for sure, and you see it when you view that movie, any of us who live back there, we remember how chaotic those times were. You know, Nixon resigns in 73. But, I mean, you think about it, rough times, so much protest. Everybody's protesting. It's in the midst of that chaos that God pours out his Spirit, and a generation gets saved, in one sense, you know. Will that happen again? I think it's already happening. It's happening in Iran. It's happening in many places in the world. We haven't seen it that much in America, but I think it's happening in pockets of America. Will we see it like we saw it in the 60s, 70s? Yeah, part of me says, no. Yeah. I don't know. All I know is Christ is coming soon. He's pouring out his Spirit now, but none of us knows when. What's the lesson? Let's be careful that we're not living like we did yesterday. Let's be careful that we're living for Jesus Christ and for his soon coming. Because I was talking to my friend this afternoon. We've talked about it here. There's a judgment seat of Christ. Each one of us as Christians will appear there to give an account for the way that we lived as Christians, not for our sins, but for the way that we lived as Christians. I want to be found faithful at his coming, and so do you. And so, you know, to me, that's, yes, we want to lift up our eyes because our redemption is drawing near, but let's be found faithful when he comes. Let's be found doing the work that he's called us to do. Let's stand together.